Good afternoon, everyone. Dean and Craig here again for another episode of UncommonCents. And today we're having a detailed discussion about succession planning in financial planning businesses. And the main question that I'm asking ourselves today to talk about is, are we the plumbers with the leaky tap? That we talk about succession and estate planning a lot with our clients, but when it comes to succession for our own practices, have we put the same effort into it? And Craig, you've spoken to hundreds of advisors probably over your career in terms of everything that they're doing within their practices. And has succession ever come up? And what's the most common plan that advisors have that they talk to you about?
Yeah, thanks, Dean, and hi, everyone. Probably the most disturbing answer, which is the most common answer, has been, well, surely it's you, Craig. Like I've told my husband, or I've told my wife that if I was to die, just call Craig. Like he's running the licensee, he's running the business. He'll have an option, and it comes up more often than not, which is a little bit disturbing, Dean. And I sit back and go, so what do you think I would actually do if that happened?
Yeah.
Well, surely there's just an advisor that you can just put in place into my business and let them keep servicing my clients, so my clients will be looked after. That might be the case, right? That you could potentially look after people's clients for a short period of time, but this is an asset that becomes part of an estate, and so then what happens to the purchase price of that? Who continues to own the business? How much are they going to get? All of those kind of things, and so there's a whole range of complications that exist well past. Surely it's you, Craig.
Absolutely,
and we need to send that message.
Indeed. And the thing, like in terms of the advisor being around to see the pain they've caused, obviously they're not. And so not only are you not dealing with the advisor that's built the business, you're dealing with a spouse or children of a deceased potentially. And we've got that extra complexity when it comes to estate planning. But Craig, we've got two kind of succession things that we want to drill down on today. So the first we want to really talk about with the audience is planned succession. So we know that advisors are aging just like everyone else is. And we talk about this intergenerational wealth transfer and things like that. And so financial planning businesses are a part of that. And so we've got aging advisors, probably averages 55 or plus at the moment. And so what are some of the challenges that we're having in terms of planned succession in financial planning firms at the moment?
Well, mate, I actually think it's genuinely having someone there that is the successor. As you know, like we've talked about in other episodes of UncommonCents around staff shortage and all of that type of thing, and it's equally just as tough to find new advisors to come in and be part of a business, and then potentially that succession plan. Like when you think through it, all the big banks are now out of advice, and so these were traditionally a breeding ground for new advisors, where they'd go, they'd be able to get all their training, their education, cut their teeth, deal with clients, and then naturally make that next step into, well, is there a practice that I could now go and be part of and then potentially succeed that owner? And all of a sudden that part of the market has become very short. So it's become more and more difficult to find that person to either enter the business. And I guess the extension of that, Dean, the other part I see is that if they do have that young person in that business, where are these people going to come up with the funding? Because as it gets time to actually get to that business, they've got then kids and mortgages and all sorts of other things. And then to actually then load up again to buy a business. And we all know that the exiting principal wants maximum value, and the person buying in wants reasonable value in terms of their loan. But, where are they getting that funding from as well? So
absolutely,
really, one, finding them, two, then getting them to pay for it.
Yeah, indeed. And I talk to advisors as well, like in terms of this entrepreneurial revolution in financial planning, where it's much easier and frankly cheaper to start financial planning businesses from scratch now, and we can find clients that way as well. And so the other competing challenge is advisors are sitting within these firms not talking about succession, which we'll get onto in a moment, but they're sitting in the firms going, do I really want to work for the next 10 or 15 years to help build this practice to then have to buy it off the principal in 15 years' time. And so that's the contrast, is that we're actually seeing entrepreneurial advisors going, I'm going to give this a go myself
Yes.
instead of paying for the business. And that's all around this communication thing, Craig, is that advisors that are working within a firm that they can sort of sense that they might be the succession plan, no one's talking about it. And
Correct.
they have this, as you say, this conflict between I'm retiring and I want to sell for the maximum price, at the same time as the advisor coming in going, I've built half this practice and now he wants 2.5 or 3 times the revenue that I've worked my butt off earlier on in the journey to bring on board. And so
Yeah.
it's a really difficult position that those two parties are in. And firstly, it starts with communication. Like, does that younger advisor know that they're part of the succession plan in any way possible? And how are we easing that financing burden, but also actually getting them in earlier in terms of ownership in the practice, to reward them for the effort of building that business?
Yeah, and I think, Dean, on that point too, mate, like once it is communicated about, because you're right, like half the time it's just assumed, but these conversations actually really do need to occur. And a number of times I've actually sat down with practices and said, right, let's actually now agree to financials. Let's actually agree to what the purchase price might be, what the multiple might be, whether it's recurring revenue, it doesn't matter. What it is it's actually making sure that there's an agreement in place around what the price might be, about reward and recognition for effort brought in along the journey by the younger person. But it needs to be clear from the start, and they need to be able to go that we know once it's time for this to occur, we've already got an agreed set of rules. Because the number one thing, Dean, that I've seen that has blown up even the best of relationships is when it comes down to the money.
Yeah.
And
even though we work with money all the time, definitely that's the conflict that we have at all points in time. And so that if the advisor is not able, the younger advisor or the succession plan is not able to purchase the business, what are you seeing at the moment in terms of what can happen to the value of the business if it's not sold in a structured way to the next generation? How is the market at the moment in terms of going out and finding a buyer? How long does that take typically?
Well, and this is the other interesting part, right? Because they go out and you can have many buyers come to you initially, but what you see in every single one of these transactions is that it's actually really hard to find the perfect match. And it takes a significant amount of time. And quite often I'll see practices meet with 4 or 5 or 6 interested parties before they actually start really working out, okay, this I think is the person to take over my business. And the other interesting part that goes with that, Dean, which I see when it's at that stage, right, where I have to now sell it to an external party, the seller normally starts off with this wish list. Like, I don't want you to change the name. You need to keep Dean employed because, he's my favorite advisor and he needs to stay. My clients won't want you to move office because and they have this list which actually starts devaluing their business. And then over that time, then all of a sudden it becomes, well, hang on a minute, I now need to start dropping these things to even be vaguely interesting for someone else to actually want to buy it, because the buyer's then looking for scale and how I can put this into my current business and create scale so they can drive more profit. So
and scale's really an interesting problem potentially at the moment, Craig, because if every advisor, we've got an advisor shortage, and so therefore if I'm the advisor that has deceased, but every advisor in the market is busy and full, then where are my 100 clients going to go into an existing business to have an advisor to service them? And so that's quite an interesting conundrum that we have as business owners overall, is that even if I could buy this business that you're talking about and then service it within my client book, I've got to have a pretty good, efficient model in my business to be ready to acquire but also then have advisors with capacity, which is obviously a challenge as well. So that's why I think that there's a challenge in how many businesses are actually set up to properly acquire your practice. And so, sure, that's a possibility in terms of one potential buyer, but you've either got to sell it on market as part of a succession, you've got to sell it internally as part of a succession, or the business might just disappear. And I fear that there's probably a fair few in that smaller revenue base that it is not a business, it's a book of clients. And those book of clients, the price of those is actually going down because it's hard to bolt them into businesses at the moment.
Yeah. And then, you think about, probably the last option available too, Dean, and that's, I want to call it institutional buyout or something, but, not that that's as strong now, but there are players in the market that are willing to buy advice businesses still, but which is another viable strategy. But what the actual practice principle needs to start to accept with that is if that kind of purchase occurs, they're going to start losing control. And I've seen a few on those journeys now where you can tell them as much about that up front as you like, but until they start feeling it, and after running an advice business under their control and their steam for a number of years, all of a sudden they're starting to lose control, and you can see the mental impact of that.
Yeah.
And even though they say they'll be okay with it, they're actually not for a period of time. And so how you get them to be prepared for that. And the other part is, bringing another perhaps more senior partner in too with a different set of views as well. Like, well, why are you running those two cars through the business? Well, I always have. Well, I don't want you to do that now because that return's not going to be good for me. Why are you doing, structured this way? Why are you structured that way? So there's a lot of things that if you leave it
to the last minute,
that's really going to, have an impact mentally too, I think.
Absolutely. So we might do a session another time on getting businesses ready for sale, just all the logistics that might go along with that. But let's shift it a little bit, Craig, and just talk about the unplanned succession, because this is the other elephant in the room that we all know statistically there will be, and there has been, unplanned succession in financial planning firms due to death and disability. And probably the main issue that happens at that point in time is the advisor's not there to advocate in any way for the sale of their business, and it's left to the executor first and foremost. And so we want to document succession plans, these unplanned succession plans. And I think if you go and talk to any lawyer about how many succession documents or shareholders agreement they've drafted this year, I reckon they'll tell you that 95% remain unsigned. And so that's a challenge in itself to ask ourselves, why do we make these things so difficult? It's a low probability execution event. Like, it's low probability that you'll die, but we need to think about it. But then we go through all this effort and draft documents, and then we don't get to execute them. So I think there's an opportunity for us to actually just document something. And sometimes we need to use lawyers less and use them at the end and have proper conversations to work out what needs to happen. But then we have to fund it. And so we have to either fund it through insurance, or we have to agree that the price will be lower if we have an unplanned succession. You can't, I don't think you can have both, that you want to not plan for this succession, then you die, and you expect that your spouse or children will get maximum value for the business.
Yeah,
just can't work together.
Completely agree. It's this is, you said at the beginning, the plumber with the leaky tap. This one is exactly that. Like, as advisors, spending our lives telling people that they need to protect what they've built up and do all of that type of thing, and yet every time, well, most times, shouldn't say every time, but a lot of times, you're exactly right, mate. They have not thought of that plan for their business. And it goes both ways. It could be for an advice business with multiple advisors. They actually haven't gone, what if something unplanned happens, and who then, how does the plan work? And I have seen an example before, Dean, where the advisor's partner showed up. So this was it was a advice firm, two partners, business partners, lady and a man. The lady had a heart attack and passed away. And her husband showed up and said, actually, I think I want to be your new business partner. And the husband and the other remaining partner didn't really, they weren't the best of mates. They were professional.
No, of course not. And they have different skill sets, different experiences. He could have been a landscaper for all,
Correct. He had
we
nothing
know.
to do,
Like,
had
nothing to do with financial planning
at all before, but all of a sudden it had this, obviously his partner's died, and so he's had a whole new look at his life, and so he's shown up and gone, well, there is no plan in place, so I just think I'll be your business partner, and I might start doing this, and I think we should change this and change that. And that's just a nightmare for the person who's already in the business and has had it running.
Correct. But legally, that is what should happen because there was no other plan in place.
Exactly.
If I own half a business, I expect the half of the business to go to my estate unless there's a plan otherwise. So I think it's an example that we always throw around the room in terms of, you'll be in business partner with the executor or business partner with the estate. It's absolutely true. And it's the right thing if you don't take the bold steps to document something beforehand to make it happen. And look, it is a challenge. My business partner and I have a funded and documented succession plan. But that being said, we tried to update it probably 4 years ago and got bogged down with legal issues. And we ended up paying the lawyer, writing a document, and then throwing it out because it didn't actually do what we wanted. And we're relying on the older one, which is still valid. We still have the insurance in place and things like that. But it's definitely a challenge to get it done. But it's a thing that we really need to think about doing as an industry. In order to get success. And that's the last point about, as an industry, trying to help everyone getting to success. There's lots of single advisor businesses or lots of two advisor businesses around in Australia. And we almost need to matchmake in a find a friend context so that those two businesses can lean against one another. And it's not always going to be the licensee that can come in and save the day in this context, Craig, but the idea of, I've got a financial advisor, we've got similar values, we both have similar businesses. Why don't we both agree that we'll buy each other's businesses if either one of us were to pass away, and we'll fund it to the tune of $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a year in insurance premiums.
Correct.
And that's the protection mechanism that we have for the estate. And so worry less about is that business going to be worth 1.2 million or 1 million or 800, just get the $1 million of life insurance and say, well, that guy's going to take over the business. I'll get the $1 million, or my estate will get the $1 million, and I'm happy with that. I think that whole, going back to that valuation thing, we have to get over that when it comes to unplanned exit from businesses, because we've got to focus on the insurance. And if we've got enough insurance, then let my friend have a little bit of a windfall, because guarantee that job is not easy either in terms of taking on that business. But this is our call out, in terms of getting this done, Craig, is to encourage our advice community to actually do succession and to either document it, think about it, phone a friend and ask them to take over the business if something were to happen, but really have those conversations. And it is something that can be facilitated by a third party, yourself, Craig, or myself, just in terms of getting through the key parts of the conversation. Is it doesn't have to be dragged down by a lawyer. This could be a 1-hour phone call in terms of getting the basics of a succession plan in place for an unplanned succession, which is a very low probability event. So let's spend an hour, document it, buy some insurance, and we're almost done. That's a quick and easy one. The planned succession, absolutely, we need to start that much, much earlier. But it is a much longer conversation as well, I think, Craig.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think for another great exercise for those people that don't have someone that could be their succession, so sole operator, running their own business, talk to the people and say, look, a wonderful exercise I've been able to facilitate before is 5 or 6 or 7 of those businesses in a room together to actually just go around the table and explain what their business is like and how they deal with their clients. And I can almost guarantee, Dean, that by the time you get around that table, there will be a couple at that table that actually go, oh, we're actually very similar. Maybe we should,
absolutely,
we should back each other up, to your point, in terms of, have a plan for the unplanned succession where we can look after each other. It's actually quite an easy exercise to do, and you actually get to spend some time with your peers in the process.
Absolutely. So we're calling it out in terms of happy to help conversations, but also we want to encourage it. That speak to your colleagues and ask them whether they actually have this thought through. We can, as a group, ask each other, have we thought it through? Do you want to chat through with it me? I'm going to introduce you to 3 other advisors that I think are similar. Chat about them from a succession planning perspective, and we can take some action around this. In closing, Craig, you sort of jotted down five mistakes that you wanted people or advisors to avoid when it comes to succession. So this is the closing of, these are the 5 things that Craig, in all his years and infinite years of experience, and what he's seen, are things to avoid when it comes to thinking about succession. And Craig, these are mainly about the planned succession element, aren't they?
Yes. Yeah, they are, mate.
Go
definitely.
for it.
So number 1 is don't play favorites. You need to avoid playing favorites. We're humans. We're naturally going to like some people better than others. But that might not be the right plan for the business, is to just, I really like that person, so I'm going to get them to take over. Don't, use that as a filter. So number 1, to avoid, don't play favorites. Number 2 is that you don't have an objective process for spotting successes. So you actually need to think through, what does my process need to look like? And then once I've got the successor, what process is in place for us? So we need to avoid not having an objective process in place. We need to, number 3 is another common mistake is people don't address disappointment. So if there's someone
with the person that's not going to buy the business. Yeah.
So don't leave them hanging there and thinking that perhaps potentially one day this is going to happen. Address the disappointment up front, and help them through that and move on. Number 4 is that some people, you want to avoid turning this process into a competition. You don't want to be playing people off with it. That's
especially within your own firm.
Yes, correct.
Yes, it's not the Hunger Games. You want succession.
No, that's right, mate. It's not the Hunger Games. And number 5, avoid keeping the succession plan a secret. People should know what it is and how it's going to work and what's going to happen with it, whether that's the planned or unplanned inside the firm. People need to know. There's no need to keep these things a secret. You talk about them with your clients for their succession planning. So you should be talking about that inside your firm with your people for yours.
Absolutely.
And actually be really proud that you've got one and that it's in place and that people know what it is.
And Craig, I would even encourage advisors to be talking to their clients about this. I think that there would be older advisors that their clients would be thinking about asking them, but maybe too nervous, or they do, about what their retirement plans are, what their succession plans are. If my advisor was 65, it's a really common question to say, hey, I need services for the next 20 years, but you're 65, so what's next? And I think it's really important that you have that succession plan articulated to a client's perspective, so that the client gets confidence and value. Otherwise, the entrepreneurial advisor that starts their own business will simply say to all of your clients, you don't want your financial advisor retiring at the same time as you. That's what I said 15 years ago in order to engage older clients. Is I said, this job's easy. You don't want your advisor retiring at the same time as me. So, sorry, you don't want your advisor retiring at the same time as you. So you need a younger advisor, full stop. And so the idea of tackling that succession with your clients as well is only going to aid the business value as well in the future.
Yes.
So that's great, Craig. Thank you for sharing your 5 tips. And that's something we want to always always do now in Uncommon Sense about sharing not only some value in terms of what we're thinking within the industry and learning, is there's a couple of tips or mistakes to avoid. So that's it for today in terms of Uncommon Sense. So thanks very much for attending, whether it's on LinkedIn or YouTube or later on through LinkedIn. So just pop any questions in the chat on LinkedIn, or if you want us to talk about anything else in coming weeks. And that's it for us for today. Thank you.
Bye.